CAB meeting to order. It is Wednesday, April 21, 2021, 12:31 p.m. And we are, of course, meeting virtually because of the Governor Walz's peacetime order, Stay Safe Minnesota order. And the first thing we're going to do is call roll and then I think approve the agenda at the same time. So you'll be asked to do the double aye or the combination of aye and nay, whatever your pleases you. So Ms. Ernst, would you call roll, please?
Anderson.
Approval of the
Present
agenda.
and aye.
Bailey is joining us later. Barber.
Present and aye.
Barnes.
Present and aye.
Boyles.
Here and I.
Crimmins.
Here and I.
Dugan.
Present and I.
Foster.
Present and I.
Fox.
Present and aye.
Geisler.
Present and aye.
Cotel.
Present and aye.
Giuliani Stevens.
Here and I.
Hanson.
Present I.
Holberg.
Here, yes.
Hollinshead.
Here and I.
Jepson.
Aye.
Karwoski.
Here and I.
Keeley.
Here, aye.
Lindeke. Okay, Look.
Here, aye.
McDonald or Buin.
Here I.
McGuire.
Mattis Castillo here for McGuire and I.
Got it, thank you. Narayanan.
Here and aye.
Petrick. Reich.
Here I.
Sanger.
Here, yes.
Schember.
Here and aye.
Stephenson.
Here and aye.
Tolbert. Ulrich.
Here and I.
Williams.
Here and I.
Windshuttle.
Aye aye.
And Workman.
Aye, aye.
All right, very good. Thank you. We've got an approved agenda. I was just thinking about George Schember's request for a little bit more of a happy nature amongst folks on the call, a few more smiles. And I think a lot of people are smiling within, but certainly a lot of contemplative thought in the aftermath of the Derek Chauvin verdict. And I think all of us are probably thinking about the George Floyd family and his friends. And really, I was thinking about it last week, that in the face of this extraordinary stress that they faced and that unthinkable loss, they were so dignified, so calm, and kind of incredibly loving of others and wanting everything to be peaceful. It was really a tribute to their family, I thought, the way they handled everything. And then, of course, the jury who served us and represented all of us in the Twin Cities area so well. I thought they were really careful and thoughtful regarding the facts and the rendering of the verdict, really on behalf of our entire community, because the jury is nothing more than a face of the community. So I think over the past year, the world has looked at us as part of the problem of racial injustice. And now I think because of the work of that jury and the work of everybody in our community that worked on this case, we're starting to see that Minnesota can be part of the solution on racial justice too, and maybe help lead the way. So just a quick opening comment there. And thank you, George Schember, for making me think about that. We've got some reports that we usually take care of at the beginning of every meeting, and mine will be brief. We had an executive committee meeting. Just a few things out of there I wanted to cover quickly. You all don't know this. We learned this during the exec committee meeting from Steve Peterson, that there is in the second round of COVID relief funding. Everybody knows about that. Apparently, we've got about $20 million coming directly to the MPO, to the Met Council. And so in that period of July through September, we'll be making some decisions on that. And we've got some broad flexibility on the use of those funds. And so that will be That will be some interesting discussions coming up here outside the context of our normal regional solicitation work. And then the other thing I wanted to cover quickly is the unique projects. Cole Henniker from our staff is going to lead that. We had a preliminary meeting last week, and he'll do a terrific job with that group of folks that volunteered there. For those tab members that volunteered, thank you so much. In that unique projects category is around $4 million, and we sometimes talk about unique and innovative use of those words synonymously. They're not necessarily synonymous, so we got to think about what we want to do with those funds. This group, I think, will help give the main tab some good guidance. I think we'll think about it probably not in trying to define what is a unique project or an innovative project, but thinking about it, and I think this is Cole's suggestion, that we think about it in a way where we do an outcome-based analysis. So we're looking at some of the things that we think are important to look at in terms of climate impact or social equity, thinking about outcomes versus definitions, because what we found in the past when we have had unique projects before is they never quite seem to fit the definition that we came up with before we decided to award some unique project funding. So that'll be composed of 6 meetings, an hour and a half each, between now and July. And we will keep the tab posted as we move along there. So that's all I'm going to talk about relative to unique projects for the moment. And then we'll move on to the other agency reports. And Member Barnes, on behalf of MnDOT, anything to report out on?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I do have a couple items here. First, I think everybody's starting to see we're going to be starting construction season here. We've got things starting to mobilize and be out there. So with these, rather than going through all the individual projects, if again, when you're traveling or have folks that want to know the impacts, if we can watch in our kind of our news releases, but also our 511, we do have our construction link of the projects this summer. We have a few of the bigger ones still closing up from last year, but if there's specifics, I can work with folks if there's either issues or concerns. But we're getting where we'll ramp up. We'll have another bigger construction season. I know there's been folks asking about how are things still going when it comes to bids, and overall we've been doing good. And kind of the COVID impacts, we are starting to see kind of some potential issues with supplies, especially some geotextiles and certain types of supply items that may have a little bit of a delay depending on kind of how the orders are coming in. But we're anticipating overall our construction season to be similar to last year. With these a few things that have kind of surfaced here too is there's now a federal solicitation open between now and June, which is RAISE. Last go around it was Build, before it was Tiger. So for letters of support, we do have kind of a little different process, but it's trying to kind of streamline to get things through. We'll be able to contact Brad Utek from our Office of Transportation System Management, and I'll send the info to Elaine, and she can send it out in the email. Also, we've been getting requests for letters of support, kind of from the the community projects list. I mean, we've been doing. There's a lot more lists going on here with opportunities, which is good, and all the member directed projects, which is kind of that renewed earmark program that the Congress is putting things together on. So we are receiving requests, and if you have already, you should be seeing letters soon. If you haven't and we're expecting to get it, please let us know. And again, I'll provide contact info to Elaine. Right now, MnDOT is working on the state multimodal transportation plan, the 20-year plan, and also the state highway investment plan, the MnSHIP. So updates are, we're going to be able to give presentations, whether that's to the local agencies, groups, and we can also look to bring kind of an update or discussion to TAB when the timing's right with that. One last item then is our Transportation Economic Development Program, TED, is going to be open this summer. There should be an announcement anticipated here in May. We got about $10 million for that solicitation. So we're thinking that the maximum award are gonna likely be smaller than previous solicitations, just so we can get those, so we have more opportunities. But so we'll give updates as that goes along. And then also DEED's going to be releasing their information on their TEDI program, which is the Transportation Economic Development Infrastructure, kind of as well here in the near future. So with that, Mr. Chair, that's the kind of the updates I have. Unless there's questions.
Yeah, there's some real interesting updates there. Does anybody have any question or multiple questions for Member Barnes on his report out? Okay, one thing I forgot to mention with regard to the unique projects is that Elaine's going to set it up so if any tab member wants to tune in and observe the meetings virtually, she'll send that information around after the meeting today. So you're sure welcome to join us from an observational standpoint. We'd love to have you with us if you're interested. For either Member Barnes or Member Solberg from MnDOT, do you want to comment on the second round of COVID relief funding coming to MnDOT for the Metro District as well, and whether the tab might have a role there?
Boy, John.
Trying to get to that unmute button, Mr. Chair. Yes, so the state did receive about 162 million in COVID relief funds back in December. The department has been going through an inclusive process with our partners over the past several months to determine the split of those funds outside of those that are legally obligated. For instance, the 20 million to the MPO. So MnDOT has now broken those funds out to the various districts, and as Metro District is ultimately part of Metropolitan Council's area, we will continue discussions initially with staff about how we might move forward, but there were some directions given through the department for how those funds may be divided out. Specifically in bridge and roadway preservation. There was additional direction towards potential projects with federal funds with gaps, and then towards large mobility projects. But we will continue those discussions through the Met Council process, and ultimately, as they're put into the STIP, tab will be making those decisions.
All right, good. Thank you, Member Solberg.
Point of clarification, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
What round of funds are you speaking of for the 162 million? Was that CARES 2 or 3 or both?
So, Mr. Chair, Board Member Keeley, the funds that are being referred to are from the December act that was passed. So I think most people probably are referring to that as number 2.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
That's what I understood too, Member Keeley, was that it was the second round of COVID relief funding that we're talking about here.
Right.
Okay.
I've heard references in other conversations that there's been 3 rounds, and it's starting to get a little muddy where you've got our normal funnel of transportation coming from the feds, and then CARES Act layered on top of that, and now we have the American Rescue Plan, and we've got the infrastructure bill coming, and so they're kind of getting it's difficult to keep track of them all, which funds are coming from which bill, past or future. And I just had another question on, it kind of touches on what you just touched on or talked about, Mr.
Go ahead.
Solberg. It's just, how are all of these funds going to be managed through this process? Because there's a lot of earmarking projects by congressional district in the forthcoming, potentially, I guess, proposed infrastructure bill. And with all of these new revenue streams coming into the state for transportation in many cases, how is that impacting or changing any existing state allocations and bills that are funding transportation? Or is it just adding to the pot?
Mr. Chair, Board Member Keeley, I think big part of that is like the second round came with a lot of flexibility, so really didn't affect the amount of state funds that currently are allocated towards transportation. The biggest issue that comes with additional federal funds is that the legislature has to authorize the department to utilize those funds. So that's probably the big issue that we need to roll through the process now. With any future funds, we don't really know what, in what way those will come to the department. However, if they are tied to matches or fund projects, then that could cause additional complications that we would have to work with the legislature on.
Agreed. Thank you.
All right, and then Member Keeley is, from what I understand from the what's being styled as the American Jobs Plan, that $2.25 trillion transportation infrastructure plan, that could have funds, surface transportation block grant funds coming directly to the MPO if everything goes through as proposed by the president, as I understand it. So that might put more funding in front of us for use other than what we'd have for our normal baseline funding through the Highway Trust Fund.
We certainly like it coming direct.
All right, and anything else for Member Barnes or Member Solberg relative to MnDOT?
Mr. Chair, one more thing I'd like to add onto this discussion. That's why with these lists, I know from a department perspective, we've been trying to give kind of the input to kind of go with projects that have been being worked on or in plans, have started within a process and have gaps, so we don't get too many that are brand new coming in at this early stage of all the different lists and trying to get it where, again, there's all kinds of projects that folks want to add, but there's a whole lot in the queues that are further along in the process. So I know we've been trying to give at least input now with that. There's a lot of different lists and a lot of different intent with that. So for example, and I did miss on the fact of saying thanks to many on this call for the support, the letters of support for our I-494 project that we did submit for an infra grant, and looking to fund $84 million piece of the project that isn't, again, the whole vision side of it, but something that we could still be able to bite off and shape and do within the time frame of the grant. So I couldn't say thanks enough for all the support on that. So
Yeah,
thanks.
I'm sure for all of us that supported it, you're welcome. Thanks for recognizing that, and thanks for asking, because we were more than happy to support it. That prompt any other inquiries from tab members? Okay, let's move on to Todd Bewan over at Minnesota Pollution Control for his report.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Yeah, for MPCA today, my report, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to send Elaine a fact sheet that we've prepared. It's a 2-page fact sheet that summarizes what has happened so far with the Volkswagen settlement through 2020. And then it also provides kind of a view forward of what's coming next. So and Elaine can provide that to all of you either soon or in next month's report. It's not all that urgent, but I think it's a good summary of kind of the bigger picture. We're kind of looking at a 10,000-foot view here, I think. So a couple of the highlights, through the first couple of years, we've spent about $12 million focused on new vehicles, installation of EV charging stations, and then just trying to maximize emissions reductions of nitrogen oxides, fine particles, and greenhouse gases. We've funded 265 new vehicles, including 140 school buses and 125 other large trucks. Some of these are electric vehicles, some are cleaner fuel vehicles. We've funded 24 off-road equipment projects. That would be like construction equipment, for example. And then we've installed 47 EV charging stations, over 1,100 miles of highway corridors. That includes fast chargers and level 2 chargers. And then the emissions reductions have amounted to over 35,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions, about 2,000 tons of nitrogen oxides, and about 200 tons of fine particles. So the fact sheet speaks to sort of that work that's been done, and then it also speaks to what's coming next over the next few years. So I think you'll find the fact sheet interesting, written sort of in a plain language way for the public. But like I said, I provided that to Elaine, and she can get that out to all of us when she thinks it makes sense. So that's really my report for this month.
All right, very good. Does anybody have a question that for Member Bewan regarding the?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Member Holland's head.
I wonder if on the charger installations, there is attention to operation and maintenance, because I bought an electric vehicle 3 weeks ago, and I've been going around sampling the charging stations, and quite a few of them have maintenance and operation challenges. So I wondered to what extent, if any, the VW money can accommodate assurance that these stations will be vigorously operated and maintained over time. I understand, I suspect most of that VW money is for capital investment, not for operations. So I understand that, but I just have that question. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, the money is granted to organizations, cities, nonprofits, private, for installation of those. And then that's a good point about maintenance. It's really the organization that installed those stations that would be responsible for the upkeep. But it's an interesting point about, I have not experienced that, but I believe that there's ongoing maintenance and issues with those, and they need to be monitored for that. So that's a good point that I'll just sort of ask about that, and what responsibility, even in the grant requests that come in, what responsibility do people have for that sort of upkeep?
I think you may be aware there's a crowdsource called PlugShare where you can comment on the status of a charger that you are using or have just used. And if you download the PlugShare app and click on the map, you can find out the history of the charger that you click on. So that's a great data source. I hope and assume that you are aware of that. Thank you.
Would you give that information again one more time, please, Member Holland's head?
It's called PlugShare. It's one word, PlugShare. It's an app available for, I believe, both Android and Apple smartphones or tablets. And it includes a number of features and resources, but the one that I find most useful is the map, where you can find the nearest charger. And then if you click on that charger, there's an I button, and it'll tell you how to comment on your experience and how to read previous comments, and you can take a photo and upload it. It's a great resource for people with electric cars.
Good. And Member Geisler had just put the link information in the chat box. So thank you, Member Geisler. All right. And then anything else for Member Bewan? We'll move on to Member Crimmins for a MAC report. You must be getting more excited out there as people have been traveling more and more, it seems like.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to mention that air traffic has improved up to 50% of the 2019 level. Last year, we were down to 15%. So that's been a 35% increase in air traffic. At MSP, we're averaging 243 daily flights. That's up from 235 last month. And the reliever airports, the traffic is 10% over the 2019 level. So a lot more people are doing private flying now. And Delta is got a flight now to Mexico City that's going to start on May 5th. And Southwest is starting daily flights to Austin, Texas on June 6th. And JetBlue is starting to fly to the Caribbean. So they're adding more routes to destination cities. And then I'll move on to COVID. We still have a testing site, state of Minnesota testing site on level 2 of the blue parking ramp. It's free COVID-19 saliva test with results delivered to the person within 24 to 48 hours. And a boarding pass is not required since you're just entering the parking lot. The second testing site is near Concourse F, and Wander Test is the service that fulfills international and domestic destination requirements. Results in 30 minutes and are sent to the traveler by text. And travelers are encouraged to make appointments online, but walk-ins are welcome. And if you go to wandertest.com, it will bring up all the information you need if you want to make an appointment as you're traveling through the airport. But that's the secure side of the airport. So you have to have a boarding pass in order to gain access to this one. And then talking about testing, we had 5,200 MSP employees have been vaccinated with the Johnson & Johnson. And we haven't heard of any incidents, but they've suspended the Johnson & Johnson, and now they're going to go to Moderna and start vaccinating airport employees again starting next week. So that's all I have from the airport.
All right, thank you, Member Crimmins. That was a good update. Questions for Member Crimmins?
Mr. Chair, one quick question.
Yes, Member Keeley.
Is it required to get tested before boarding a flight? One traveler told me that was the case, a pilot actually, but my wife traveled recently and she said she wasn't required. So I'm curious if there is any kind of requirements. Is it by airline or any at all?
Yes, it's not a MSP requirement. It's each individual airline has their own requirements, and it depends on where you're flying to. Some countries and some cities have requirements that you cannot be allowed into the city unless you've been tested within so many hours before boarding the plane. So it might depend on where you're going and who you're traveling with.
Gotcha. Is it also true or not true that if you have your vaccination card and you've completed your vaccination, does that preclude then? Will they accept that in lieu of, or is there requirements to have a current test within 72 hours on top of your vaccination card?
Again, it depends on your destination. Some destinations will accept your shot card, and others want the shot card. Plus, as you're aware, even if you have both shots, you can still be a carrier of COVID. That's why they want people to still require to wear a mask, even though you've received a double dose, because you may not be sick, but you could be a carrier and you could infect somebody else. So it's going to depend on the airline and the destination. So naturally, you should inquire previously to arriving at the airport.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
Mr. Chair, Stan Karwoski here. I'd like to just make a testimony for Carl's description of the public testing at the airport. One of my family members uses it often, and it's very convenient. So it's a really good testimony. You know, it's the one you don't need to be flying. And it's very convenient for those that live in South Minneapolis. But again, well done is what she has frequently told me. So just a little testimony.
And given that it's free, that's even better. There's many testing sites that are still charging $100 to $200. And sometimes it's difficult to find a free testing site.
Well, and again, this site is a state of Minnesota site. So it's just on the airport property.
And what concourse, or what, not concourse, but what parking ramp was that in, Member Crimmins?
It's in the blue ramp on level 2.
Okay. All right, very good. And then finally, Jeff Barber for the Met Council.
Mr. Chair?
Yes. Oh, excuse me, Peter Dugan, member. Yeah, member Dugan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. May I follow up with Mr. Crimmins, Commissioner Crimmins, for one question?
Of course.
Carl, always good to see you, and thanks for the update. Congratulations on your success there at the airport. I'm curious to follow Councilmember Kiwi's inquiry. Will the airlines, you foresee the airlines at some point asking if you've been vaccinated as the vaccine becomes more efficacious? And where do the HIPAA rules, collide with that? I'm just wondering where they may see this going with requiring tests, and who do you have to disclose to? And because my understanding is if one has to disclose the results of the test to board an airline, that's a health-related record, which is not controlled, but regulated by HIPAA. So I'm just curious if the airport or the airlines had looked into that.
Well, the airports have been trying to get the FAA to come down with a ruling to make it consistent across all airlines.
Mhm.
And the FAA is not eager to do that. They're letting each airline make their own rules. And again, the trouble is too, these passports, if you want a vaccination passport, some states now are suing against that you can't require that of a person. Like you say, that's a privacy rule. So it depends on where you're traveling to. If you go to Texas, they probably won't acknowledge a shot record because they don't require it. And if somebody doesn't want to get inoculated, there's nothing you can do about it as far as of now. So I think it's mostly going to be hit or miss, helter skelter between the airlines. But I think most people are going with the destination. When you go to a city that requires this stuff, if you don't quarantine for 14 days when you get there, which might be their rule, then you could be fined. I know one person was fined, I think it was $5,000 because they violated the quarantine. They didn't want to stay quarantined for 7 days or 14 days. So it all depends on where you're traveling to.
Thank you, Commissioner Chair.
No problem.
Anything further for Member Crimmins? All right, let's go to Member Barber.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So kind of continuing with some of our COVID theme here, just want to kind of let you know some things that we're doing. So transit is playing a key role right now in getting people to vaccine sites and vaccines to the community. We've been working with the Minnesota Department of Health and are providing free rides for customers who have vaccine appointments at the State Fair vaccination site. This includes users of Metro Transit and all of the Metro Mobility customers. Also, we're providing buses and drivers for the Minnesota Department of Health mobile vaccine service. Those buses will be used to provide pop-up vaccine sites in the community and areas where transportation is a barrier to getting the vaccine or to where there's large groups of people that makes going to their site an efficient way to get the vaccine administered. Lastly, we're working with the counties also to provide on-demand transportation for groups of seniors or others who are in group living facilities to vaccine sites. So I'm really proud of the efforts that we're doing to help the vaccination effort here in Minnesota. A couple of other things, after having meetings with the Minnesota Department of Health and per the guidance from CDC and the Minnesota Department of Health, we've recently increased the passenger limits that are allowed on buses and trains to 50% from 25%. That has been in effect over the last year. Our ridership still continues to remain fairly steady. Obviously, it is down from years prior. However, we're still seeing steady ridership, especially on the ABRT and local and supporting local routes. I'm hopeful that as we have the expanded ability to have more passengers, that we'll start to see some of that coming back at a little more higher pace. But I'll make sure that I have some numbers for you next month because that just went into place. But I expect we'll start to see some changes in that as more people get vaccinated as well. Another thing that I wanted to mention a little bit was at the Transportation Committee meeting on April 12th, we had a presentation on shared mobility. This is something that we've continued to work on, and there's a couple of big things that are happening over the next few months coming out of this effort. One is we're developing a mobility hub planning guide that will be go out for a resource, and that's going to be available in December 2021. We've had a lot of players involved with that, whether it's people from Met Council, people from Metro Transit, people from the suburban providers, people from community groups have all been contributing to that effort. And I think that will be a great asset as we look at building some of this mobility hub concept into our system. And then the other thing is we're launching a Northeast Minneapolis microtransit pilot. This microtransit pilot will launch in October of 2021. It's a good opportunity to focus on first and last mile service connecting to the C line. So what we're doing right now is we've got connections at Penn and Olson, Penn and Plymouth, and there will also be a Route 5 connection. The hours of this microtransit service will cover basically the same service hours as the C line, but it's a good opportunity for us to try something out and how to really build that connectivity into communities to make sure people are getting to where they need to go and in the most efficient way possible. So I'm really excited for that. That presentation is attached to the April 12th Transportation Committee minutes. So if you want to learn a little bit more about that, you could take a look at it there. And then lastly, I just wanted to mention that we do have a very significant open position here at Met Council. I don't know if you've seen it, but we are currently looking for a new regional administrator. The actual original first deadline was last Monday. However, we're still accepting applications. So if you know of people who would fit that role, obviously Met Council, we cover a lot of different topics and areas, but definitely pass that information on to people in your networks so that because we want to find the best candidates possible. So if you guys have anybody who you think would be a good fit, let them know. So with that, I'll take any questions.
All right, thank you, Member Barber. Questions for Member Barber?
Chair, I have one.
Yeah, Member Keeley.
Actually, an inquiry on your first and last mile microtransit. It sounds a lot like Southwest Prime and MVTA Connect. Is it basically a point-to-point, for lack of a better term, Uberish type of service, on-demand service to get people to the C line?
Yes, it is. So it is very, very similar. We're operating a little different. We're keeping our fares the same as the normal bus fare and with the normal transfer rules, which is different than the two suburban projects, and it's also TAP eligible. But definitely trying to take that same sort of concept, but to connect, make sure that we're getting people kind of those last steps to the destinations that they actually want to get to. And so it'll operate both to connect people to the C line and to connect people out to the community.
Well, I think that's wonderful. I had heard in recent meetings months ago that Met Transit had been fairly just neutral on whether they wanted to do this type of model that we're sort of incubating in the burbs, and I'm thrilled. I think it's a great idea, and I do believe very strongly that that's really the future of a lot of transit support is this on-demand model, and I'm sure the folks up in that area are going to be very happy to have that service available to them.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that combination of this microtransit element and those mobility hubs, so the mobility hubs would connect to, places where, you might have bikes or scooters or other things where you can start to really connect out. So I think that sort of taking or looking at it with both those perspectives really starts to serve the communities. And I really envision these mobility hubs ultimately being good community spaces as well.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm really happy to see both, people from our urban core, but also in the suburban areas participating in the development of that mobility hub guide, because I think it matters in all of our communities, and I think it could be a great asset to our region.
Agreed. I think it goes a long way to our accessibility, right? The whole equality and accessibility for transportation. This is a big piece of support, I think, to allow folks who maybe don't have an automobile, and the bus stop or the C line or wherever it is just several blocks away, and if it's raining or snowing or inclement outside, it's a very difficult, right, to overcome that, and this gives them pickup curb to curb essentially.
Yep,
that's wonderful. Great news.
Good. All right, thanks, Member Keeley. Thanks, Member Barber. Anything else, Member Barber?
Nope. Unless
Right.
anyone has other questions.
Other questions or comments relative to Member Barber's report?
Mr. Chair, I have a question.
Yes, Member Narayanan, go ahead.
This is on behalf of my alternate, Glenn Johnson, who's asking if there's any way to provide feedback to the federal agency running the vaccination site at the state fair. Right now, it seems like bus directions are very limited and there's no stop info, and we just get the address to metrotransit.org. Is there anything you can share with us on that, Member Barber?
I'm not sure. I don't know, Director Thompson, do you have any comments on that?
Yes, Chair and members, we are adding some information to the system so that you could book, and it would give you, because we've added a connecting bus service. And I believe that should be coming online any day, but I will also pass that information along to make sure that our org site, and we have good contacts with those running the site. So I'll follow up on that and make sure that we make improvements there.
Thank you, Nick.
Yeah, thanks, Member Narayanan.
Yeah, and if you have any other specific direct feedback, definitely send it to both Nick and myself, and we can make sure it gets out to the right people.
Yep.
Good. Thank you for that, all of that. That's good. All right, let's move on to John Solberg, TAC Chair. John, Member Solberg, do you have a TAC report?
Yes, Mr. Chair, just very brief, just to keep things moving. Of course, 2 weeks ago, TAC met. They had the items, business items that are before you. They moved them forward with unanimous consent to recommend to TAC. Additional discussion during, or information items during the TAC did include, again, the RBT and bike barriers process and the electric study update from Tony Fisher. One other item that TAC is beginning, that began during a discussion of TAC executive, is revising TAC bylaws. In part, the discussion facilitates recommendations that came out of the TMA cert that we'll be hearing about next month. And that concludes my report.
All right, good. Thank you. Did that prompt any questions from any TAB members? All right, we'll have Member Solberg back with us shortly as TAC Chair. All right, let's move on to the business items. We've got them broken into two categories, of course, consent and non-consent in the business category. So the first in the consent portion of that part of the agenda, we've got the minutes, and then we've got two streamlined amendments. Those two projects, we want to move into the current tip so that the projects can get started. Does anyone wish to remove an item from the consent agenda? Otherwise, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as shown.
Move approval, Anderson.
Second, Boyles.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. All right, any further discussion? Roll call, please. Ms. Ernst?
Anderson,
Aye.
Bailey, Barber,
Aye.
Barnes,
Aye.
Boyles,
Aye.
Crimmins,
Aye.
Dugan,
Aye.
Foster,
Aye.
Fox,
Aye.
Geisler,
Aye.
Kotel,
Aye.
Giuliani Stevens,
Aye.
Hanson,
Aye.
Holberg,
Aye.
Hollinshead,
Aye.
Jepson,
Aye.
Karwoski,
Aye.
Keeley,
Aye.
Lindeke,
Aye.
Look,
Aye.
Buin,
Aye.
Metis Castillo,
Aye.
Narayanan,
Aye.
Petrick, Reich,
Aye.
Sanger,
Aye, but I would like to note that I have a question about this after the roll call is completed.
okay, Schember,
Aye.
Stephenson,
Aye.
Tolbert,
Yes.
Ulrich,
Aye.
Williams, Windshuttle,
Aye.
Workman.
Aye.
All right, thank you. The consent agenda items are approved in single motion and all adopted, and then back to Member Sanger.
I know you needed to get the new fare boxes now, so I didn't want to vote against it, but I would like to raise the question, why are we still having fare boxes? Why isn't Metro Transit going to the same approach that so many other transit organizations are doing, where there's no more cash, it's all electronic cards to pay your fare? And which to me, it speeds up the process enormously. And I would like to encourage Met Council to start addressing that question.
All right, we've got a few folks that may have a contrary opinion here, or at least information that they may want to share. Anybody from staff or member Barbara, first of all?
Well, I can start and then I'll let our staff chime in as well. There still continues to be a number of people who are unbanked in our communities. And so at this point in time, we continue to take cash. And that was a discussion that we had when we were going through the fare increase a couple of years ago, was that we still felt that there was enough people that needed to pay in that fashion, that we wanted to make sure, because our concern is we don't want to prohibit somebody from taking transit because they are not in a position in their lives to have access to a bank account. And to me, that's really becomes a fundamental equity issue. And so that was the decision at the time. And definitely something we continue to look at going forward. We do have programs like the TAP program and things like that, where users are issued a card. But I think that at least at this point in time, it didn't seem, as we looked at it, it didn't seem to be the right decision to shift just to cards.
All right, and member Foster?
I mean, I think member Barber pretty much nailed it. I would also just add, I think there's always an opportunity to talk about fare-free transit systems. And once we start to explore that seriously, then I think we could start a conversation about removing fare boxes, because they would definitely not be needed then. But member Barber got it. There's a lot of people who are unbanked. I mean, I am banked and I still will pay transit fare with cash, especially if I'm riding through downtown when it's cheaper and I got quarters on hand.
All right, thank you, member Foster. All right, anyone else have any comment they wish to add on this matter?
Just note that better than 5% of citizens in the metro are unbanked, and there's some that are minimally banked. So I would agree with Met Transit, Ms. Barber, that pulling that fare box is not a good idea.
All right, thank you, member Keeley. All right, let's move on to the only action item we have on the non-consent portion of the agenda, and that deals with the F-line project. It's action 2021-15. John Solberg, our TAC chair, is going to introduce the topic, and then we got a PowerPoint presentation, and we're going to talk a little bit about what's coming next as well. And then we've got to make a decision on whether to award $25 million to the Metro F-line route as it will be described. So, Chair Solberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this item again comes before you in part due to the actions that TAB took back in December, which was really awarding the 2020 regional solicitation and holding back that $25 million for future ABRT to be determined as Metropolitan Council finished and adopted their Network Next ABRT system. And so just as a reminder that this did come through TAC, TAC did recommend with unanimous consent to move this forward and award that TAB award the $25 million to the 2020 regional solicitation for the Metro F line. And for more description about the F line, we have Charles Carlson here to give a presentation.
All right, thank you, Chair Solberg.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Charles Carlson, Director of BRT Projects for Metro Transit. Next slide, please.
Carlson, welcome.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, in recognition of your schedule today, I might abbreviate my remarks a bit to get through the presentation a bit faster, but we'll be happy to either go into any more detail or follow up with any questions. So
good.
just so you know my plan
all right
today. So this item, TAB approved this item with this new category for arterial BRT. Back in September, we amended the timeline for selection. So instead of being selected with the other projects in December, it would be selected in April 2021, and here we are. The reason being that we could then pursue much more detailed community outreach and more thoughtful planning in response to the combined challenges of outreach during the pandemic as well as civil unrest last summer. So TAB took that action. Throughout the process, we've been in front of TAB with information items, most recently from Katie Roth in December of 2020. Next slide. So just a quick reminder of this process. So we checked in with TAB last as we were moving from step 3 into step 4, and now we've completed step 4, where the council has selected the next 3 lines, and that's sort of the subject of today's presentation. Next slide. So in December 2020, around the time that we last connected with TAB, we were launching a survey effort to get significant input on selection of the next lines from this list of potential near-term candidate corridors. I'm happy to report that we received over 4,100 completed surveys, including a significant effort to get in-person surveys to complement the comparatively easy effort of getting online responses. That was instrumental in our ability to obtain a more representative sample from the region. In that, we heard support for every one of these lines that is shown in this map, and pretty consistent support from what we had heard from TAB as well as through the solicitation process. So interest in providing service to BIPOC communities, providing new areas with service that currently do not have BRT or LRT nearby, and then really facilitating the bread and butter connections of our local transit system. So not just to work, but to schools, stores, and other key destinations as people live their lives around these transit lines. Next slide, please. So working through this then, we are posed with the challenge of selecting the F line and then from there selecting the next couple lines that we would hope to implement by 2040. So having heard strong support for all the lines, it wasn't really, the public input wasn't really a differentiating factor. So we looked to other things that really differentiated these lines from one another, ridership being key among them. So there's a range of between the existing and then the forecast 2040 ridership shown in this row, where Central Avenue really rose to the top, particularly in terms of the current or near-term ridership. Capital cost is the next area that we looked at, and Central Avenue and Rice Robert both being close together in terms of around $80 million cost, while the others were a bit higher. And then an annual operating cost significant to us in this time of pending fiscal cliff and forecast operating shortfalls. With a $15 million annual operating cost, the Central Avenue line is more affordable to make the next transit expansion investment in. So that really rose the Central Avenue corridor from Blaine to downtown Minneapolis to the top. So that with that selected, there were other criteria that really guided us toward the G line and the H line, among them looking to really expand the reach of the metro system. So each of these first lines did that for the expansion as the next corridor, but when we've selected Central as the F line, the Rice Robert and Como, Maryland corridors did a better job of furthering that reach compared to Johnson or Lindale that are comparatively close to other selected lines. So that brought them above in the ranking. And then finally, thinking about the implementation order, working with our partners in these corridors, identified a strong preference that the Rice Robert Street corridor would actually follow the Como, Maryland corridor, so that the high quality connection into downtown St. Paul could be maintained while implementing a change of the order the Como Maryland corridor, where that corridor would no longer go straight to downtown St. Paul, but would be a new crosstown service to the Sunray Transit Center. So when we put those together, the Rice-Robert Street corridor rose as the G line, the Como Maryland as the H line. So these would really be our next priorities following today's F line selection action. Next slide. So when we start putting these together, we have these 3 next lines now named. We'd be serving 4 counties with these new lines. There's about 40 miles of new BRT corridors between the 3 of them. This action came before the Met Council on March 24th, and the council agreed and selected these as the next lines. There are a number of additional promising lines that we looked at within Network Next, and I think there's 7 more that we'd like to implement by 2040. With this selection, really the next step would be to come back and look at all of those next lines again around 2025. Selecting the F, G, and H lines now allows us to continue project coordination and allows us to begin the planning before we would then look again at the lines that we'd implement beginning in 2030 and beyond. So it enables a lot of those next steps in addition to our candidate corridor for regional solicitation funding. Next slide. And that brings us just to the requested action today that TAB award the $25 million identified in the solicitation to the F line along current Route 10 from downtown Minneapolis to Northtown Mall via Central and University Avenues. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yes, nice presentation, Charles. Thank you. Questions for Mr. Carlson or for Chair Solberg? Folks, we've been working on this for quite some time. We've got the money set aside, and now we've reached that time where we are going to potentially award the $25 million identified in the 2020 regional solicitation to this particular line. Is there someone who would care to make that motion? Yes.
Mr. Chair, just a quick question on the funding source for that 25 million. Where did that come from?
I think staff can help on this, but it came out of the regional solicitation funds that we reserved. Chair Solberg, do you want to comment on that?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, that was part of the decision-making process over, I believe, the last year. And I think my council staff can clarify exactly when that was made, but the TAB did decide to withhold that 25 million of the total $200 million available at their discretion for transit, specifically for the ABRT corridor development.
Follow-on question, Commissioner?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to thank staff for this work. I'm particularly excited in what comes next with the G and H line, as it's long overdue investment in the East Metro, and both of those lines will go through my district. And so just want to thanks for all the work and input and to name those as well. And with that, I'd be happy to move this item forward to make a motion.
Second, Geisler.
Second, Geisler. And member Reich?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll echo the gratitude to the staff work, and of course the recognition of all the planning that this group had put into not only the category, but just sort of the framework of what we think a growing region should benefit from this sort of transportation investment, and in a truly systematic moment where this isn't just one line. We see the whole map. And that to me just is really as exciting as this individual line is. That approach and that commitment, both in planning and investment, I think is pretty heartfelt. I'd also note that, talking about investment in, my area, which this will go through, just the tone and tenor of my counterparts to the north. Columbia Heights is sort of my northern neighbor. It's a different county, Anoka County, and talking to the leadership in the municipality in particular, but also legislative, their not just excitement, but understanding of the importance and how they've expressed it to the legislator, how they've expressed it to each other, and how we're talking regionally in a way that we haven't been in some time. To me, that is another effect, I think, of good investment. Because it's creating a regionalist dialogue amongst local sometimes provincial conversations now are becoming more regional. And so I just a side effect that I think is noteworthy and wanted to mention.
Yeah, that's a very noteworthy observation. Thank you for sharing that with us. Other comments, Member Hollinshead?
Yes, I just want to express my appreciation for this as well. We watched for years as the prior Minneapolis mayor and his staff did some planning for a streetcar along this route, and that didn't go forward. Now we're going to have the F line, and I think it's a wonderful addition to the network. So I'm a strong supporter of this, and I look forward to the succeeding two lines. Since I live in the East Metro, I like the balance of this outlook, and so I hope everyone will vote for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Gattell, and then Member Barber.
And thank you, Mr. Chair. I reiterate, of course, my thanks to all the staff, but I also want to say that to our chair, Mr. Hovland, you led really great conversations on this. There was lots of robust discussion about the BRT, and I know there were people who wished other lines were there, and yet we all came together to support this one that moves forward. So I just want to say thank you for everybody looking at this in a holistic way. The county staff here in Hennepin County, we support the request to continue to work with Metro Transit on all upcoming ABRT lines. Lines enhance transit services, usually right and access on county roads. So counties play a big piece in this. The county right now, our county is in the process of adopting a climate action plan. And we highlighted the importance of meeting some transit goals to make emissions goals work. And so this is where we need to be, and this is where we need to go. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Member Barber?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just a couple of comments. Just wanted to let you all know that as Charles had mentioned, this has gone through Transportation Committee and full council last month, and with overwhelming supports. I think that real balance in the connected system and seeing how that whole map is starting to lay out really brought a lot of I think hope and promise as we look to the future. So with that, I want to thank all of you. I think doing what we're doing now and having this money set aside was a really bold step for TAB to take. And I really appreciate the commitment to transit in our region and the understanding of the impact that we can have for the very, very long term for our region. So a special thanks to all of you. I also do want to thank our staff. So Charles and Katie Roth and all of your teams and all of the work that you've done. You've really taken a holistic view at all of this. And I think doing this during the time of COVID with some of the constraints and limitations, you all just totally exceeded all of our expectations. And I'm super proud. So thank you very much for all your hard work.
Well, thanks for those observations and those compliments. They're always well received. Well, we've got a motion and a second that the TAB award $25 million as identified in the 2020 regional solicitation to the Metro F line along the current Route 10 from downtown Minneapolis to Northtown Mall via Central and University Avenues. Is there any further discussion? All right, roll call, please.
Anderson,
Aye.
Bailey, Barber,
Aye.
Barnes,
Aye.
Boyles,
Aye.
Crimmins,
Aye.
Dugan,
Aye.
Foster,
Aye.
Fox,
Aye.
Geisler,
Aye.
Gotell,
Aye.
Giuliani Stevens,
Aye.
Hanson,
Aye.
Holberg,
Yes.
Hollinshead,
Aye.
Jepson.
A very enthusiastic yes.
All right, Karwoski,
Aye.
Healy,
Aye.
Lindeke,
Aye.
Look,
Aye.
Bewan,
Aye.
Metis Castillo,
Aye.
Narayanan,
Aye.
Petrick, Reich,
Aye.
Sanger,
Aye.
Schember,
Aye.
Stephenson,
Aye.
Tolbert,
Yes.
Ulrich,
Aye.
Williams, Windshuttle,
Aye.
Workman.
Aye.
Very good, folks. The requested action 2021-15 embodied in the motion as stated is approved. Very good. Member Lindeke, comment?
Yeah, I just had a question, Mr. Chair. Thanks for asking, calling on me here. I'm sort of curious about if any of the expected federal money could be used to accelerate some of the build out of this ABRT system, which seems to me the most efficient use of our transit dollars. I know you're all very early in these conversations, but I was curious if Metro Transit had talked about that at all.
Anybody from a staff standpoint want to comment on that as to whether you've had any discussions along these lines? Member Barber?
I'm really going to defer to staff. I think your point is that we're still early in some of this, and that is true. And some of this we're still figuring out how dollars can be used, especially with round 3. So I don't know that we have a full answer. I see Nick has popped on screen, so I see if he has a better answer than I do.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members, that's a great question. I think there's a couple of things. We have funded the ABRT network partly through state bonding, and I believe we would do a similar request in the future for additional state bonding for ABRT. And then federally, clearly the new infrastructure bill that's being talked about includes an increase in transit funding, and I would expect ABRT would be one of our region's priorities for some of that increase in funding. So a lot of work is still being developed in what that infrastructure bill is. So we're monitoring that. So I think there's a lot of potential there.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Member Lindeke, any follow on? That's good for now. Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think these comments have been so on the mark and so appropriate. Years ago when we started working on ABRT, we were a little bit uncertain as to what its future would be, but it has proven to be just a star in the transit system. And so I'm glad that we're pursuing these different routes. It is really an effective and efficient use of transit monies in our region. So now we're finished with the business portion of the agenda. We've got 3 items on the information portion of the agenda. The last 2 items, the RBTN and bike barriers update processes, the rest of the regional bicycle barriers and update process, and the electric vehicle study, we can defer those to another meeting if we need to. I wanted to make sure that we had enough time with Juhi Pomplun. Ms. Pomplun is the Executive Director of the Alliance for Metropolitan Stability. Heidi Solberg from our staff is going to introduce Ms. Pomplun, and then she is going to lead us in a little bit of a conversation after grounding us in some of the things that she wants us to be aware of first. And so I'll turn now to Heidi Solberg for the introduction of Ms. Pomplun.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. So just kind of as the chair acknowledged at the start of this meeting, this has been kind of an even more reflective day. And so I just kind of wanted to transition a bit to continue the discussion and information that this group has heard focused on equity. So both for this month and next month, we've invited speakers from community-based organizations working on equity to bring in perspectives the TAB hasn't typically heard from as directly. Just as a reminder to kind of help with that transition, kind of different headspace, some of the previous guidelines we had used in discussions when we started this with my colleague Roderick Southall a couple of months ago. I don't have the slide today, so I'm just going to kind of read them off. Just reminders to please listen deeply and stay engaged, to know that virtual meetings can be tough, to kind of pay attention sometimes, but please try to maintain that focus. Please, of course, be respectful of each other. And then just the last 2, just acknowledging that discomfort is okay. And that is something that commonly comes up during equity work at different times. So just please allow space for that if you feel out of your comfort zone at some point. And this lastly, be curious and ask questions. So this part of your meeting will invite discussion at different points. So you can speak up, raise your hand in WebEx, or use the chat. Staff will also be watching those to support our presenter, who I'd now like to introduce and who we greatly appreciate being here today. So Juhi Pomplun is the Executive Director of the Alliance for Metropolitan Stability. At the Alliance, Juhi coordinates the learning table for the Equitable Development Principles and Scorecard. and convenes an emergent table representing the BIPOC small business ecosystem, the Business Resource Collective. With Metropolitan Council, they have participated on a work group to continue to refine the equity criteria of the regional solicitation, and previously engaged with Metro Transit as a member of the Blue Line Coalition. Juhi has over 20 years experience of organizing for systems change on issues of transit, small business, wealth building, community safety, and health equity. I have a degree in women's studies and a master's of public health from the University of Minnesota. And with that, I will turn it over to Juhi.
Thank you. Ms. Pomplun, welcome.
Thank you, Chair Hovland. My last name can be easily just said with an I at the end, so Pomplun. Pomplun.
Pomplun. Yep.
Yes, so much easier to say it that way.
All right.
So thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Tad, for having me here today. I do have a slide presentation to kind of keep me on point. And I do invite this to be a presentation a conversation and not really a presentation, although admittedly, I will be doing 80% of the talking probably. So, so thank you. And it looks like Greg has the slides. So if you want to move forward, then Greg, I need to figure my stuff out a little bit. All right. So the Alliance for Metropolitan Stability, or the Alliance, is the organization with whom I work, and our mission is to advance justice and equity and economic growth and land development here in the Twin Cities region. We are a 26-year-old organization and a coalition-based organization, both as an alliance of 33 organizations, as well as building tables around issues of development, transportation, housing, small businesses, to work to promote systems change and equity for communities of color and low wealth communities here in the Twin Cities region. So next slide, please. I wanted to define the objectives for today just to kind of keep myself on track and also to let you know what to expect. And so I'll start out by affirming why equity is important in transportation. I know that this will not be new to you all because this is the conversations you've been having, but I want to put us all on the same page with that. And then understanding the importance of intentionality and planning. And so, so I'll talk about aspects of that intentionality that can be put into the planning. And then finally, to talk about the Equitable Development Principles and Scorecard, which is a tool that your developers and planners, community can all use to be, again, on the same page about what equitable development is for your communities. So next slide. So I really wanted to start us out, and again, like I said, in grounding ourselves in equity. And so given the presentations that you've already had, and I had took the time to watch them on video afterwards, that Roderick, Kristen, and Matt discussed, as well as Professor Getz on whiteness and planning. I want to hear from you all your personal reflections on how you understand equity as it relates to transportation. So if people want to just kind of unmic or unmute themselves and share what you see, understand equity as it relates to transportation, or if you want to put it in the chat, it would be great just to kind of put us all on the same page and what we're thinking about and talking about.
All right, other folks that would prefer to use if you prefer to use the chat, go ahead. If you want to respond to the question, it's hard to see here. Maybe you could just speak up.
Yeah, this is Matt Hollinshead.
Thank you, Member Hollingshead.
I think my simplest conception of equity is in transportation is that people of all races and backgrounds and incomes have equal access to primarily necessities, but also destinations of choice. And that would be my definition of equity, as simple as I could get it.
Thank you, Member Hollingshead. Others?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Member DeGan?
Yes. Juhi, how would you like us to refer to you? Is it by Juhi? Is that okay? Okay, thank you. I second what Mr. Hollingshead or Member Hollingshead had said. I also see equity. I see transportation as critical to the economic success of a community, let's just say the metro. And that means it's got to be available to everyone, particularly workers and folks who depend on transportation or public transportation as their means of getting around. As I said, the economic part, I believe because transportation plays such a demand in plays such an important role in economic development that if folks do not have access to transportation, then perhaps they cannot participate in the success of the economic success of the community. Thank you, Johi.
Thank you.
Others?
If I might add, Member Geisler here, I would, to me, as far as transportation and equity, transportation is a catalyst for equity, in my opinion. It is the thing that binds and connects a lot of things. I've had a lot of conversations about, developing workforce, developing housing, developing, services, and equitable access to those things furthers equity in scalars to me. And with how you get to home, work, and services is through transportation, whether that's transit, whether that's road, whether that's whatever. But it is the thing that can enable equity to happen in other places, and so it kind of catalyzes equity happening throughout the region, throughout the area, and assists those other equity approaches and solutions in accomplishing their goals.
Thank you, Member Geisler. Other thoughts? Do we have anybody using the chat yet? I haven't checked.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Mattis-Castillo, I would like to go a little further, actually. So I think about equality as kind of making everyone have access, and equity is about investing in the communities that have historically not have access or have been disadvantaged historically, and making an investment there to bring them even one step further ahead or close to the equity. So I feel like we're talking about transit equality, and equity is about going beyond for communities that have been historically disadvantaged over time to basically make up for the 200 years of lost opportunity for communities of color in particular.
Yeah, thank you for that. Other thoughts?
Mr. Chair.
Member Foster?
So I don't remember who said it. I didn't take very good notes, but on one of the last presentations, someone had talked about how everything is normed to white people. Like white people is the whiteboard against which all other groups are examined, and how when we talk about racial equity, what we really are doing is centering the experiences of people of color. And I think that's sort of like when I think about transit equity, that's sort of like the grounding for it. It goes along with what Commissioner Mattis-Castillo talked oh, sorry, it was almost a car crash outside my house. That's sort of one of the groundings that I stay in when I'm talking about it.
Other general thoughts on, because this is, we've been talking about this issue now for several different meetings, and I think Ms. Pomplun identify this issue for us and ask us what we've come to realize or what we've come to think about the use of the term equity in the context of transportation is a good one. And
I'll add a little something, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Commissioner
Karwoski from Washington County. Very good inputs on the dollar investment, and I agree with that to bring equity, but it's beyond dollars. I think it's where we our social behaviors and processes and our cultures such that those feel welcomed to go where they want to go of their choosing. That's outside the bounds of Transportation Advisory Board, but it's truly connected. You can provide the investment, but if our society doesn't shift to be welcoming and inclusive, it's an attitude that kind of has to come a long way. I think we've seen a start of it yesterday through the courts.
all right. Thank you, Commissioner. Anybody else?
Mr. Chair, this is Sue Sanger.
Yes, Member Sanger.
Okay. In addition to all of the good comments that have been made now, I would add one more thing. When we talk about equity and investment for those who have been underserved, I think we have to also include persons with disabilities and elderly, in addition to low-income people and various communities of color, because the elderly and the disabled have been in many ways very isolated because they don't have usable, accessible transportation options to the same degree that many other people do.
Thank you, Member Sanger.
Mr. Chair, I have a comment.
Yes, Member Narayan.
One thing I also want to mention is who gets to make transportation decisions that benefit whom. Often I feel like we've seen decisions being made in opaque ways by a small group of people that disproportionately affect especially people of color in perhaps negative ways, and being able to make sure that the voices of those who have been left out have included and centered in decision making, I think also will help to get us to transportation equity.
All right, thank you for that. Mayor Williams.
Chair Hovland, when I think about transportation, I think about more than cars and buses and trains. I think about bikes and walkers, and I think we're doing better now than we used to by being more conscious of sidewalks and roads and bike paths and those kinds of things, because that's how some people, that's the only way they can get around.
Thank you for that too. We've had comments around access. We've had some comments around need. And I'm wondering if that's causing folks in the broader group to start thinking about whether that means we should be heading one direction or another. Because to me, access deals more with, I would say, the concept of equality, where you give everyone the exact same resources. But when we're talking equity, we're really talking about distributing resources based upon the needs of recipients. And I think that's what this tab has been wrestling with is, are we in our work where we tend to track, but we tend to be mindful of congestion. Congestion is caused by economic prosperity. And so if transportation funding is constantly chasing congestion and prosperity, that means you're going to leave some people behind. And it might be inadvertent. In some places, it might be purposeful. I'd like to think in Minnesota, it's been inadvertent. And I think we've all come to realize that we need to be thinking about distribution of some of our resources based upon the need of our potential recipients. You know, when we talk about North Minneapolis, where only half the people have access to a single an automobile, you know, and that idea of being able to make sure that you're able to provide that linkage between jobs, transportation, and housing. All of these things are important considerations. So those are just a few of my thoughts, Ms. Pomplun.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. You have some really great thoughts around equity and how it relates to transportation. It actually makes me think that maybe you looked at my slides ahead of time, because I think this is exactly what we're going to be talking about. And you guys, much of what I'm going to say, I actually think will be just affirming, you know, what you guys are already thinking about equity. And, you know, and I hope just for the sake of all of our time that I further that thinking a little bit with this conversation. But I think you guys are all on point and really thinking, you know, it's not just about the structure of what is providing that transport, you know, ability to transport from A to B, but it's the access, it's the history, it's the who makes decisions and the power of making those decisions. It's who is being centered, and, you know, is it and whose needs are being met by the project and system. And so I think you guys are all, you know, very much on point and are really already thinking about important aspects of moving our system from just, you know, being something that divides communities to something that helps to unify and bring communities together. And so, Greg, if we could go back to the slides. And then go to the next slide. So taking from what I heard from the previous conversations and just from the landscape of work that I do in talking about equity and working with systems to transform themselves to be more equitable, some of the things that I observed is how equity sometimes gets appropriated, and when people, you know, insert the word equity, they're really talking about equality or parity, which I think many of you mentioned in your comments about equity, that access is really just equality because you're creating this platform that everybody has access to, but the ability for people to access it is very different. And so that equity oftentimes gets used as a synonym for diversity and inclusion. And so you're just talking about people of color, and you're not really talking about the systems that perpetuate the inequities, right? And so again, it gets appropriated inappropriately. Like I just mentioned, a euphemism for people of color, or people approach equity as a tweak to the existing system, when these systems, as Professor Getz talked about, or Dr. Getz, are, you know, truly embedded in this country that was based on, you know, white supremacy, and given the fact that of who our founding fathers were and the role people of color have played within the building of the country over the many years, you know, we are different now than we were then, and those systems perpetuate. And so tweaks do not always make the changes that we're seeking, right? And that equity might be time limited. We have this measurement of equity or equality or diversity in this moment, we've met our goal. And again, I think we all know that we can make tweaks and shifts that have short-term effect, but equity really needs to have that long-term regenerative effect. And equity really isn't justice. I think justice needs to have an aspect that is a form of reparation, right? It's a form of restoring a community and making it whole. And equity doesn't necessarily always have to do that. although I think it is a goal. And so you'll actually see that on the right side of my slide. When I say that equity, just very much like Roderick said, is that equity isn't not just an outcome, but it's the process. It's a process, right? So it's hard to imagine that we'll ever be finished with it, though that is the goal. Equity is human-centered, so very much to, I think it was you, Chair Hovland, that talked about that it's about the needs. So, and somebody else, I think, Member Dugan, you also said that it's about the needs. It's about where do people need to go to, what is it that they, what is the modality people need to get it. So it's being human-centered and making sure that the project is enhancing the livability for the communities it is serving. And it's not what I've experienced in projects that once that human-centeredness piece is kind of gets timed out and overshadowed by timelines and budgets, right? And so it's really important to keep the human-centeredness as the goal and metric throughout the process. And equity can be relative to the communities. What I need to feel whole and included and feeling like I have access to something is and can be very different from another person, right? And so there's some relativity within equity, which is why it's so hard to define in one single definition, right? Because one community has a different need than the other, but it doesn't mean that any one need is more important than the other. And then that equity is reparative, like I was talking about, that there is an aspect to equity, the causation towards the need for equity, right? Again, the history of this country, the role that people of color played in that, the exclusion that was very intentional over the first couple hundred years of this country, that there needs to be some form of reparation in that, right? The efforts to control communities, whether it be through policing, whether it be through the putting of memorials to military people who cause great harm to communities in the middle of our communities. There are all these different ways that control and harm gets perpetuated from history, and so there's a need to be reparative to that. And then, like I said, regenerative, that it's not just about in this moment that it creates a benefit, but how does it strengthen our communities 10 years from now or a generation from now? How do my kids also benefit from it? And so wanting to make sure that the benefits continue and build upon itself into the future. So next slide. And then, like I said, equity is very difficult to define because there are so many different aspects to it, very intersectional across many systems that have created the inequities today. Correcting the education system isn't going to be, the cure for poverty, right? And so there's many different layers to it. But within the Alliance and the fact that we are a coalition-based organization that builds tables of communities to address the different issues in the region, we have been able to define 4 prime principles within equity. So the next slide. And so these are not exhaustive by any means, but we think that these 4 principles are essential to achieving equity, which one is that it's a human right. That we all agree that everybody should be able to benefit from an investment, a project in our communities. And oftentimes, and too often, you see that within the creation of a benefit, people start talking about exclusion. Well, because there's this perception that people are going to take advantage of systems or whatnot. And so we start to go into how do we create exclusion to ensure that certain people can benefit and are not disturbed in that benefit, right? And so we have to agree that it's a human right and that we strive to make it accessible and beneficial to everybody. Next one. And that, and I think it was Amity, I remember Foster, who said that it's claimed and defined by those who are most harmed by the systems of oppression, right? And so we are centered in those communities who have been most harmed. And so I know that when we talk about equity, oftentimes persons want to talk about youth, persons want to talk about our seniors, that definitely systems have ways of excluding young people and seniors. However, when the Alliance, when we are talking about equity and communities that have been left out and most harmed, we're talking about those who have been harmed systemically over generations and throughout the history of this country. And that those are the voices in the communities that we feel need to be able to come forward and be built upon right now, and that that we need to be shifting how things work in this moment. So if we can go to the next slide. Oh, okay. That equity must be fundamentally about building power, capacity, and leadership to annul structural and institutional racism. And that goes to what member Narayan talked about, is who's making the decisions. It's who's, within the project teams in government, it's who is the electeds, it's who are making the decisions. But not only that, but it's also then about, because we can't all be in those positions, it's about really shifting how decisions are made and centering a community. If you have seen the IAP2, I think, it's this engagement model. And so they will say that engagement can go from just informing people, which we all know is a super problematic engagement model, to actually making a commitment to responding to what people want and need, to their input, right? And making that project meet those needs of what the community is asking for. And so making so working towards that type of commitment with community and shifting the power so that the community can really define, again, going to that human-centeredness, define what that project is and what its purpose and mission is for success. So next slide. And then finally, recognizing that equity is, efforts must be intersectional. Again, it goes to that multi-layers of systems of oppression that exist. I don't think any of us would deny that, and that those patterns of oppression are interrelated and bound together. So addressing racial equity for one community is not necessarily addressing it for another community. Addressing racial equity overall doesn't necessarily address gender equity, or equity for gender persons. And so there's oppressions are interrelated, and we need to be addressing all of those for those who have been historically left out. Next. What I thought were going to be big concepts for you, and seemingly unrelated to transportation, or your role and authority as TAB members and the roles you play in your communities otherwise. And again, like I feel like I'm reflecting a lot. I reflected a lot of what you guys already named, but I'm wondering if you have any new reflections from this information of talking about equity being a human right, human-centered, centered in the communities, historically harmed, intersectional, shifting of power, being reparative or regenerative. Are there any reflections to that, or does it spark any further thinking for anyone?
Folks, Additional thoughts? Based on the presentation from Ms. Pomplun?
Mr. Chair, Mary Giuliani Stevens here.
Yes.
Joe He, thank you. Excellent presentation. I just had a quick question on clarification as you spend time defining this, the equity as a human right, and you reference, immigrants and low income. Is that non-white immigrants and non-white low income people, or are those broader categories? Can you just share some of your thoughts on that?
I think that it can be inclusive of all immigrants and of all low wealth individuals. That said, I would still say that the systems still are set up against persons with darker skin or who are not white. And therefore, I do believe an immigrant from, Somalia or we see the Asian hate that's happening, for East Asians, that I don't believe similar things would erupt if it were from a white immigrant community. That said, I do believe immigration status still does have its own need for attention as well, though.
Mr. Chair? Oh,
Yeah. Member DeGan?
Yes, Mayor Williams, did you wish to speak? I'll defer to you.
No.
Okay. Joe He, thank you so much. I really appreciate your expanding the concept of equity, and it's certainly helping me. One of the things I'm most appreciative of is, I take so much for granted, and you're helping bring light on to that and in ways that I probably would not see. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, Member Foster.
I would just say on that last slide you showed up in the bottom, it said that racial equity work is regenerative. And I often don't think about it and maybe this is just like negativity that I stay in all the time, but I often think of it as like only reparations and it stops there. And thinking about like the forward facing idea that our transportation system could actually be regenerative in the communities that it is also repairing kind of shifts how we think about the development then. Like, what is the possibility of change in this community? And not like gentrification change, but just like, what is the support that the community will need going forward that isn't just making up for what was destroyed? Like, it really is sort of focuses on the idea that I think other people said it earlier, like transit equity is or can also be providing access to even more equity, like opportunities for more equity. So that was just like a refreshing and a good grounding to sort of sit in right now. So I appreciate that very much.
I was going to say, Ms. Pomplun, that over the years I've been on the tab, we have this, part of the work is really technical, done by the engineers. Part of the work is policy driven with input from the engineers for the tab itself. And this mechanism that we use on the regional solicitation has been one that, we've created over time and tried to refine over time. And now one of our most recent efforts is, what is the role of equity in transportation? And you seized on that question. And when you talk about shifting how decisions are made is a commitment that should be made. I'm trying to think about how that would function in the context of how we go about doing the work that we do with trying to be objective in that approach as to how federal monies get spent. with the last kind of lens we look at everything through being geographic balance, understanding, I think, that the reason we're addressing this question is because we realize that there have been some missed opportunities here with certain parts of our broader community. So how do we go about strengthening those communities? How do we potentially shift how decisions are made, or how we go through that process of reaching a decision and meet those sort of goals that you described that should be there when you're thinking about equity? Does that make sense?
Yep, Chair Hovland, would you like me to respond?
Please.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. And you know, I think it takes time, right? Just like with the regional solicitation, I think there was a desire to just mandate everybody does like this in-depth, ongoing community engagement, and there is a recognition that, well, if you do that, nobody's going to score 0 because people have to learn what does that look like, how do they do that, and you know, and doing engagement for the sake of engagement is not meaningful either. And so I think it takes time and coaching to do that. And so to make a commitment to community. So when you go out and do engagement and you hear a community say that they need greater access to jobs, you know, and what does that mean? Does that mean job training? Does that mean actual jobs? Does that mean we want any job, or does that mean we want career-oriented jobs, you know? And so hearing what people are saying and letting, you know, working with them to define that for better understanding. But then, you know, going from there to back to the project, how can this project help meet that need, right? And I think I heard people say that earlier. How can this project meet that need? And so does that define where station areas go? Does that define the route? Does that define what access looks like, knowing that there might be, I mean, we have universal access kind of expectations, but are there specific things that are going to be necessary for it? Circulator routes that go with it, you know? I'm just kind of thinking off the top of my head without really knowing in depth everything that goes into a project. But I think the commitment is to use that information in good faith to be able to say, yes, we can do this, and here is how. Too often, from a community perspective, we put out this information and share this information, and we don't hear anything about it in the end unless that project happens to meet part of it. And then they'll say, well, this project does do this, and it's more coincidental than intentional, right? That it might connect a community to a certain job hub or something. And so, and I might not be giving you enough credit in that. Perhaps it is actually much more of an intentional listening and practice that we do, but community doesn't get to hear that. And so we don't know how our input gets implemented, heard, and then prioritized, right?
I think that's a good point you raised. Yeah, I think that's a good point you raised there, because that's one we wrestled with pre-pandemic was if we have some of our resources that we want to distribute based upon the needs of recipients, how do we define those recipients, and how do we define the need? Well, we thought that nobody could better help define that need than the people who need the resources. But we couldn't really reach out to them when the pandemic started, in the, you know, by going out and having your sort of traditional town hall meetings or having gatherings somewhere. And it's not everybody has access to the virtual world, so that didn't seem like it was working as well as we wanted it to work either. So that might be a different way to ask you the question is, when we are thinking about distributing some of the resources we have based upon the needs of recipients, how do we go about doing it so that we make sure we're strengthening those communities that do need it?
During the pandemic, one of the strengths that I saw happen by the philanthropy community is the philanthropy community actually pulled their dollars together in a disaster relief fund, recognizing that they themselves did not know where those dollars should go, and sought out intermediaries in the community who did know where those dollars should go. And so I use that as an example to say that when you don't have the relationship and ability to gain that information, then there are people out there that do the work, have the relationships, and can help you get that information, right? And so by cultivating those relationships with those community partners and building their capacity, that's really an important part of it, building and supporting their capacity to maintain those relationships with their communities, then that can help you get information quickly and broadly and across diverse communities.
All right, so the
And vice versa.
extent you have knowledge on some of those intermediaries, would you be willing to provide those contacts to Heidi Solberg?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Thank you. Other questions for Ms. Pomplun?
Yeah, Mr. Chair?
Yes, Member Sanger?
Yes. Yesterday when I was going through your whole PowerPoint that was provided to us, and as I listened to you today, there is, to me, something that you haven't, which is this. You talk about importance of equity in transportation, and you have made many references to transit projects, and you also made reference in your PowerPoint to sidewalks, which makes a lot of sense to me. But at TAB, a fair chunk of the money that we have to allocate goes to freeways and other, relatively high-speed roads. We don't get involved with local street routes. We're talking about high-speed roads. And the question to me, I've always been perplexed by is, how do you measure equity when it comes to freeway projects? And I know you have a scorecard approach, which is great, and you've talked about looking at the outcomes, but how would you measure success of applying equity principles to roadway projects?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's an excellent. I'm sorry, Chair Hovland.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I think that's an excellent question, Member Sanger. And if we go to the next slide, it may not help us immediately, but it may help us in the moment. So if Greg, you went to the LRT station area hypothetical, yeah. So there's nothing in here that's specific to an LRT station here, but so if we take those different principles or values that we talked about and applied it to a roadway project, we would, talk about it being a human right, that everybody has a right to access it. And what does that mean? And perhaps that impacts the width of the road, perhaps that impacts the ability to have an overpass to the road for pedestrians, perhaps that, or a physical barrier for cyclists to be able to use it safely. And or it could also be about speed or about, lining it with the sound barriers and trees and things of that sort. So so I'm kind of going into different things, but first of all, that everybody has the right to access it, and that it doesn't necessarily create or perpetuate harm. So if we think about too that roadway projects like 94 and how it cut through neighborhoods, the rights of people to be able to go from A to B quickly should not be valued over top of a community that would be decimated or harmed either, right? And so the benefit of the roadway, but also the impact of that roadway to that existing community needs to be weighed with that. And then the human-centeredness is more of what I was talking about earlier, what do the people need? Do people need a high-speed road through their neighborhood. If that is the best route, how else are people traveling in that neighborhood? And that's, again, maybe it's the pedestrian bridge, maybe it's the bike paths, maybe it's making sure that it is the sound, noise, and things of that sort. But hearing from the community of what they need for their livability as well. Centering in the communities historically harmed. So again, thinking about how roadways have harmed communities in the past. Hearing from the communities that live right there, and finding out how this road can perhaps rectify some of the harm. Maybe, it could be as little as memorializing the roadway, right? We have also Memorial Highway, memorializing the road. Maybe it could be, again, with art that goes over or alongside of it, that recognizes the community that you're driving through. That's not just a blank, highway that without any place, in the community, but you're actually driving through, here's the neighborhood of North Minneapolis. The intersectionality, again, just being universal in who you're thinking about and making sure that you're addressing the various communities that have been left out. Shifting the power, just like we were talking about to Chair Hovland's question before, making that commitment to listening to the community and what they need and trying to say yes to what those needs are. Reparative, again, it's just making sure it doesn't perpetuate harm, and then how might it be able to repair it? I mean, there's the Dale Street Bridge that is over 94. They did a huge amount of engagement on that bridge, and they did, community design in that bridge that honored the Rondo community and are generative. So I think looking at that investment and what are the to Amity's or Member Foster's comment, what are the investments that are happening along it? Is it just letting people zoom through with disregard, kind of like what in North Minneapolis, or does it actually, or might it be an opportunity to create a new stop for communities and a way for communities to promote themselves, right? And promote their business districts. These are things off the top of my head. If you're really looking to do an equitable process, you're asking the communities themselves. It's not being answered by yourself or me. But I'm just kind of walking through how some of these questions could be answered and thus applied to a roadway.
Thank you.
We've got about 15 minutes left. I want to make sure that you cover, Ms. Pomplun, what you want us to absorb, if you will.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Chair Hovland.
I'll give you that, just kind of that heads up.
Yes, thank you. So the next slide, I was actually going to invite you all to think about your road projects and how you might apply it. If we have time at the end, maybe we can come back to that and get you all to be thinking about it. So in the next slide, I just wanted to share the Equitable Development Principles and Scorecard with you all. I do hope that many of you are familiar with it, and it sounds like many of you are. It's a tool that was created by community several years ago now, finalized in 2016, but has really grown as a tool to start conversations of equity and equitable development. And so I see this as a powerful tool for you all to be thinking about the projects that you work with. So let me go next. So the scorecard, just as a high level overview, again, it was created by community, and it was created out of the need to have a shared definition of what equitable development was. There was a lot of pressure investment happening in low wealth communities and communities of color, where communities were feeling very threatened for displacement. And so wanted to be able to push back on development projects to make sure that the development projects actually were going to benefit the existing community, but they didn't really have any framework to work with to have that shared language. And so the scorecard was created. And one of the great things about the scorecard is how it really forces one to think intersectionally, not about the identities of communities, but intersectionally across issues in a project. And so I apologize, I don't recall who mentioned it before, but one of you had mentioned early on about how it's not just about roadways, but it's about the housing, it's about the small businesses, it's about the education and opportunities that get created. And so the scorecard has all of that and forces a person who's using it to think about how their transportation project does impact those different areas based on the principles. And the tool is not intended to be taken off the shelf, although it's okay if you take it off the shelf as a starting point, but it's intended to be about conversations and engaging the community to gain the community input on what equitable development is to them. It can be used for a single project. It could be used for a master planning process, so a whole area. But it's about engaging the community that's going to be most impacted by that project and centering their voice in the definitions of equitable development. So if we go to the next slide. The scorecard is only as good as its users. So again, it's not about me defining it. It's not about you defining it. It's about going out and talking to those communities that have been most impacted, historically affected by development in the past. And so without those voices, then it's just a check mark that you did something, and it's not really honoring what the tool is intended for. The scorecard inherently is a scorecard, has scoring, and some people are turned off by that, but I always say that the scoring is important because it allows a project to know where it sits in the rubric of equitable development that the tool provides. And it is not the end point, it's the starting point for the conversation then. So if community says that this is scoring at a 20 out of 100 points for community engagement, again, it's not to say that that is a bad project. It's an opportunity for that project to say, hey, well, how can we improve this? What do we need to do? And to be able to build that partnership to bring up the score. And so essentially, because it's really about these conversations and about how do we meet the needs of the community, it's just how development happens, right? It's not a development happens in isolation and gets proposed and then passed by the city and community ends up with it. It's a partnership with the community to create something that benefits it. And finally, that creates intentionality and centers community in the purpose and mission of the project. So kind of going back to that human-centeredness, the tool, again, because of the conversations, because it inherently needs to have community voice, creates intentionality and centering in that. So if we go to the next slide. The tool has 5 principles currently and 1 coming soon. And so the 5 principles of the scorecard are around community engagement, transportation, housing, land use, and economic development. And so again, that's what I'm talking about when it forces this comprehensive perspective of a project. So you can't just be doing a transportation project and ignore these other aspects of it. Understanding how it impacts the others and then addressing that together is really important. And then coming soon, we are currently working on revising the tool. And part of that revision is to include a livability principle. And that livability principle talks about the belonging and inclusion that I think one of you, Kowalski, actually, member Kowalski talked about, is that member of that inclusion piece. And so you can have the perfect development with, transit access and jobs, opportunities and affordable housing. But if it doesn't provide a sense of welcoming, if you're it's a highly secured building that is just blank white, no sense of culture, it's not enhancing the livability of a person. It's not what we would really say is an equitable development. And so, so we're adding this livability principle to it. And currently, and we should have a working draft by June for that. So next. And so I just wanted to give you a kind of a glimpse into what the scorecard looks like. And so it has a scoring sheet that asks about, you know, if the project is, what the project is, what kind of subsidies might it be getting, and then obviously the scores of the scoring process. And then the scoring sheet, the one for community engagement purposes, it lists out criteria, kind of the how might a community operationalize that principle of community engagement, are listed into the criteria. And again, you can take it yourself as a starting point, but it really should be vetted and then refined by the community being most impacted by the project. And then finally, there's a glossary of terms in it. And that's actually been one of the more popular pieces of it because it helps to create that shared language that often prevents us from being able to have those discussions together. So the next slide. And so then the scorecard has been adapted to other purposes and uses by communities. And so Cycles for Change, an organization that unfortunately is no longer, they created a transportation scorecard. And all of these can be found on the Alliance website. But I just want to point out that their scorecard actually has 4 different principles that they use, and those are listed here: local vision. So again, that community centeredness, community power, creating that commitment and shifting that power to let community lead what the project does and means to the community. The inclusive design. Inclusive design is the intersectionality and relatively to what's accessible within the project, and then priority and connectivity, which kind of connects to the human-centeredness of the project. And so it's actually a really fabulous scorecard. I really encourage you to take a look at it. The next slide. The way they do it is they actually put important terms throughout their scorecard. And so one of the things that I learned in when I came to the Alliance and talking to the Met Council and others was that community to the Met Council actually means the cities and municipalities. It doesn't actually mean community as I think about it, like my neighbors and friends, right? And so that was a learning point for me. And so they offer, you know, the definitions to make sure that people are having that shared understanding of what's being discussed throughout the document, as well as have a specific section on gentrification to really underscore that as an aspect of what communities are kind of fighting in the use of the scorecard. So next slide. So like I said, the use of the scorecard has just really grown. And so I call it Scorecard Enthusiasm. And so we actually have a table, a community of practice table. It's a learning table of users of the scorecard or those who are interested in using the scorecard. And so that's called the Scorecard Enthusiast table. We meet quarterly, and I'm more than happy to invite any and all of you to that. We also have the new emergent government scorecard enthusiasts, which I hope that many of you might have interest in, where actually members of the Met Council, well, not members, staff of the Met Council are leading this in partnership with the Alliance so that there can be discussions of using the scorecard from the government perspective, right? Because there's some challenges, I'm sure you all are already thinking of them, in implementing something like this. And so how can you apply these principles into your work to create more equitable outcomes in development projects? And then finally, the Alliance, we have been capturing case studies of the use of the scorecard because the scorecard has been used in many ways that are not just the intended way of scoring a single project, but have also been used to influence how resources get allocated, or like you just saw the transportation scorecard being very specific to a project. So those are different ways you can learn more about the scorecard and get connected with others as well that are using it. So next slide. So that's it. Thank you for listening. Again, you guys have a really strong understanding of equity and how it relates to transportation already. So I hope that this just offers some additional food for thought as you move forward in your work.
Well, thank you so much for that presentation. It was, you know, as we have all these different presentations made to us, I think our understanding and is growing. We're becoming probably more effective, more. You know, it's a different lens that we're looking at things through, and it takes some time, as you say, to learn how to do that, because we've just kind of taken life for granted, a lot of us, you know, because that's just the way it is. As you pointed out, we're the product of people that set the rules a long time ago, and it causes you to look at life through a certain lens, and we need to be looking at it through a different lens. And this is one of the reasons we wanted to get embraced or immersed in transportation equity issues. And you've helped us a great deal today. So thank you for that. Other final comments as we wrap up from tab members?
Mr. Chair, may I? Commissioner
Yes,
Patel?
please, Commissioner.
First of all, thank you so much for this. And I was so excited to hear the scorecard at the end. That was so exciting to me to see that. And because I was just thinking about the project that some of you sitting around this table at very well known, or the 35W494. And we paused that because we needed an equity analysis. And I think that there was a lot of people fumbling in governments, trying to figure out what that was, what does it look like, and how do we measure it, and how do we get true equity into the project. And I think we're still not where we need to be. And I'm really hopeful that you will push and share and advocate very strongly to governments to look at a scorecard. We may need to adapt it for our own use because there are federal guidelines on some of this, but there are ways in which we could certainly be using some more tools that is come right up out of the grassroots of our community. So that's even something for us to ponder more at the Met Council. What does our toolbox look like? So thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Commissioner.
I agree with Commissioner Gotel, and to add some, I would additional comments is we talked about this about a year ago. How can we, rather than just approve a road project through a neighborhood, let's rate those road projects as to the impact, both the economic impact, quality of life, equity, everything we talked about today. So I'm hoping moving forward we can develop a rating system that factors in the benefit of the road to the community for equity purposes. That's just going to be a better dollar investment. I think we'll have to figure out a formula, though, that allows the suburban areas to bring equity. You know, it may be a different, you know what I mean? We're going to have different situations throughout our 5-county area. So we're going to have to figure out a way to still bring equity throughout the region, but also factor in the benefit to the community and in all races and economic backgrounds. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Commissioner. Ms. Pomplun, you've been helpful on the journey here. You were a good guide today for us and a good teacher. So thank you for being with us. Thank you for agreeing to talk to us. Mayor Williams, did you have something you wanted to say?
No.
Okay. All right. So we're at the 2:45 hour. I want to thank folks for, typically we're done about 2:30, but thanks for sticking around for this important presentation. And so thanks for being with us today. We appreciate it. And we will see you down the road somewhere. And if we could get access to your scorecards, that might help us with some of the planning we want to do too.
Excellent. A great idea.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. And we stand adjourned.
Thank you. Bye-bye.